Hi students, welcome to SGC online classes. Today we are going to start a new chapter in economics called inflation. This word, the word inflation is very common to everyone, especially you guys are commerce students. So you know the word inflation. Now in this chapter we'll understand in a better way the meaning of inflation, what are the effects of inflation, and what are the causes of inflation. Now let's start with the definition of inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is a quantitative measure of the rate at which the average price level of the goods and services in an economy increases over a period of time. It is the increase of price of the goods and services. Basically, in inflation, in one line, if we see what is inflation, that means the purchasing power of money gets decreased. What does it mean? It means earlier when we were buying certain quantity of certain goods, now during inflation we'll get lesser quantity of that particular goods because the price of that goods has increased. In other way, we can say the buying capacity of money has decreased. Clear? This is called inflation. Now, what are the causes of inflation? Why inflation happens? There are so many types of inflations are there, generally three types: demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. Let's start with the first one, that is demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs when the overall demand for goods and services in an economy increases more rapidly than the economy's production capacity. That means the demand for the goods and services increase in comparison to the supply of that commodity. One example we can see, with the oil prices, demands are high, the production cut down the nation decide to cut down the oil production. The supply diminishes. And when the supply diminishes, immediately the price of oil will increase. In any commodity, I am giving an example of oil, it happens to all the goods and services. When the supply of that goods and services restricted, then the demand of the goods increase and the price will also increase. Then the inflation happens. This type of inflation calls the cost push, demand pull inflation. Now question is, what does it mean? Additionally, an increase in money supply in an economy also leads to inflation. With more money available to individuals, positive consumer sentiments leads to higher spending. When money comes in the market, the buyer, they generally buy goods in a higher price. That also leads to inflation because the seller sell the goods in a higher price because they will get more and more revenue. This is one case of demand pull inflation. Cost push inflation, what does it mean? Cost push inflation is a result of the increase in the price of production process inputs. Example include an increase in labor cost to manufacture goods or offer a service, or increase in the cost of raw material. Cost push inflation it increases the cost of the raw material, the inputs of the production process. It can increase the cost of material, labor, or any direct expenses related to the production. When the price of that particular input increases, then the overall cost of the finished goods also increases. That is also a cause of inflation, but that is a cost push inflation. Now, third one is built-in inflation. What does it mean? Built-in inflation is the third cause that links to adaptive expectations. What does it mean? As the price of goods and services rises, labor expects and demand more cost wages to maintain their cost of goods. When the price of the goods and services increase, the salary or wages of the labor also increase. Why? Because to maintain their cost of living. Their increased wages result in higher cost of goods and services, which will affect the finished goods cost. Now, what we have understood now, what does it mean? What you mean by inflation? Inflation is again, let's start with the first thing. Inflation is a quantitative measure at the rate which the average price level of the goods and services in an economy increase over a period of time. In short, we have seen that the purchasing power of money gets decreased. If you ask what does it mean by inflation, purchasing power, buying capacity of the money gets decreased. Earlier, we were buying certain quantity. Now, during inflations, we need to buy the same goods and services, but the quantity will be less. While discussing inflation, we have seen there are three types of inflations are there: demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. Demand pull inflation means when the demand of the goods and services increase, then the price of that particular commodity will definitely increase. We have given an example. When the production of the oil gets cut or supply of the oil is less in the country, the demand will definitely increase and the price will also increase. And same thing happens for other goods also. If you see few days back, there are very less supply of onions in the market. What happened? The price of the onion reaches around 150 per kg because the supply is very less. Demand is same. The price has increased. What do you mean by cost push inflation? Cost push inflation means the price of the raw material, price of the labor, and the cost of direct expenses which are related to the production process gets increased. When this items gets increased, the price of the raw material, labor, direct labor, and direct expense increase, automatically the price of the finished goods will increase. This is a cost push effect. What is the built-in inflation? When the goods and services gets increased, the price of the goods and services gets increased, this salary and wages of the labor also increase because to maintain the cost of living. Clear? Now, what are the effects of inflation? There are 5 positive effects of inflation. Better savings account rates. What does it mean? Increased inflation may turn out to be investor friendly. Investor with short-term aims might invest in a high-interest savings account. Increased inflation, when the inflation is increased, the investors, they invest money in a high-interest saving account, which may get better opportunities as the increasing inflation often prompt the Federal Reserve to increase the interest rate. Next one is cheaper to travel abroad. The rise in inflation will lead to a drive in American dollars, which makes purchase in foreign countries cheaper when compared with US dollars. The next one, offset negative effects of deflation. The inverse of inflation is deflation, which results in reduced price on many things, such as grocery items. Deflation might significance good on the exterior because it rises the value of the money. What are the positive effects? It offsets or it removes the negative effect of deflation. When the price of the commodity gets lower, that is also not good for the economy. Higher wages. When the inflation increase, the wages also increase, because to maintain the cost of living. It's not only wages, salary also. If you see the dearness allowance, why it has been given? It has been given because the price of the goods is rising every year. To maintain that increase and to maintain the cost of living, the government or private sector, they increase the dearness allowance. Cost of living adjustments. Even there is no money to invest in stocks, gold or other assets that might be positively impacted by rising inflation. A sensible inflation, 3 to 5%, would still benefit the financial situation. Inflation is not always bad. 3 to 5% inflation is still beneficial for the financial position of any country. Increase the marginal material cost. The inflation results in rise of prices of all materials, by which what happens? The healthcare prices for prescription goods and all these things, they increase. This has far-reaching impact, especially during hyperinflation. So material cost, these are the negative effects. What are the negative effects? Increased material cost. If the price of all the goods and services increase, then it is very difficult for the common person to buy the goods and services. That is the negative effect. Another one, increased borrowing cost. We see at the time of inflation, the borrowing cost, that means the rate in which bank gives us loan, that also increases. That is the problem. The loan is costly because you need to pay more interest on that loan. When you pay more interest on that loan, then it's very difficult for the small businessman to take loan and to invest in business for expansion. Adjustable rate mortgage might have higher rates. Same thing happens for the mortgage loan also. If you mortgage some assets to take a loan, the interest rate on that type of loan also increase. Generally what happens, if you mortgage something against that loan, the interest rate is little bit lower than without mortgage loan. But in the case of inflation, the type of loans also, gets increased. So we have seen the positive effect and negative effect of inflation. Now, what are the types of inflation indexes? Depending upon the selected set of goods and services used, multiple types of inflation values are calculated and tracked as inflation index. Most commonly used inflation index are the consumer price index, CPI, and wholesale price index. What does it mean? The consumer price index? The consumer price index is a measure that examines the weighted average of price of a basket of goods and services which are primary consumer goods. They include transportation, foods, and medical care. It's a weighted average of prices of a basket of goods and services which are primary consumer needs. These are transportation, foods, and medical care. These are needed. Every person needs transportation, every person needs medical facility, every person needs food. Wholesale price index means the price in the wholesale market gets increased. It varies from one country to another. They mostly include items of producer or wholesale level. For example, it includes cotton prices for raw cotton. If the wholesale price of the raw cotton is increased, the overall price of the cotton will also increase in the wholesale market. What is producer price index? Producer price index is a family of indexes that measures the average change in the selling price received by domestic producers of goods and services over time. The PPI measures price changes from the perspective of seller and differs from the CPI, which measures price changes from the perspective of the buyer. Now, how to control inflation? Every country in the world is worried to control the inflation. If the inflation increases more than the ordinary level, 3 to 5% and more, then it will be difficult for the government to control the economy, maintain the economy. Because inflation, if inflation happens, the price of the goods and services will increase and it will be difficult for the persons to manage their households. If you see in the underdeveloped country or developing country, where the inflation rate is a little bit higher, their economy always gets suffered because of the higher inflation rate. Now question is, what are the types of inflation? We have understood the meaning of inflation. We have understood the effect of inflation, negative effect and positive effect. We know the causes of inflation. Now, what are the types of inflation? How many types of inflation are there? First one is creeping or mild inflation. By the name, you can understand that this type of inflation is very mild. Mild means in economics, should be a percentage. If it is the inflation is happening within a percent of 2 to 3%, that means it's a mild inflation. Clear? Mild inflation is not at all bad. Economy will not be disturbed or affected by mild inflation. Walking inflation If the inflation percentage goes to 3 to 4%, that is a working inflation. It is also not that bad so far as economy is concerned. Galloping and hyperinflation. What does it mean? Hyperinflation. By the name, you can understand that inflation goes to a big level. If the inflation touches 3-digit figure, 100%, 200%, then it's very difficult for the economy to stand. That is called hyperinflation. What are the government's reaction to inflation? Inflation situation may be open or suppressed. Because of anti-inflationary policies pursued by the government, inflation may not be an embarrassing one. For instance, increasing income leads to an increase in consumption spending, which pulls the price level up. Always inflation is not bad. When the income level of people increases, the price of the goods and services will definitely increase because the purchasing power of people has increased a lot. That is why they are purchasing. And that is why the price of the commodity also increased. It's not bad. Now, what is the difference between demand pull inflation and cost push inflation? Very, very important. Demand pull inflation means the demand of the particular goods and services increased in comparison to supply. But cost push inflation is what? The price of the raw material production process, price of the production process, the raw material, the direct wages, the direct expenses gets increased. The demand pull inflation tries to explain the phenomena that how does the inflation start. But cost pull inflation deals with the idea of the difficulties faced while eliminating the inflation when it once starts. This is the difference. Demand pull inflation is caused due to the increase in money supply, which can be due to several factors, including the increase in investment, decrease in savings and others. But cost pull inflation is caused due to emergence of the monopolistic group in the market. The last difference is the policy. To eliminate demand pull inflation, revisions in fiscal and monetary policies are to be made. If government wants to eliminate the demand pull inflation, they need to modify, they need to make amendments in the fiscal policy. But the income policy and the policy of administrative control and price should be reviewed and modified according to the need of the hour as per the cost push inflation policy. So today, what we have understood in the chapter of inflation, first we know that what is inflation? It is a quantitative measure at the rate at which the average price level of the goods and services in an economy increases over a period of time. The purchasing power of money gets decreased during inflation. What are the causes of inflation? Three types of causes are there. One is demand pull inflation, demand pull effect, cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. Demand pull effect, what does it mean? Here, the demand of goods and services increased in comparison to the supply of that particular goods and services. Then the inflation arises. The price of that goods increased. Cost push effect means the price of the production process. which are related to production, raw material, direct wages, direct expenses. This increase. When these are the things, price of these items increase, the overall price of the finished goods also get increased. Then the inflation arises. What is built-in inflation? Built-in inflation means when the price of the goods and services increase, the salary and wages of the laborers also increase because maintain the cost of living. Now question is, what are the effects of inflation? Inflation do not have only the negative effect. It has some positive effect as well. What are the positive effects? Better savings and account rates. During inflation, whenever you deposit something in savings account or invest something, they get better price, better interest. Cheaper to travel abroad. The rise in inflation will lead to drive in American dollar, which makes purchase in foreign countries cheaper. Offset negative effect of deflation. Deflation means the price of the goods and services decrease. Inflation always maintain a balance. That is the positive effect. When the price of the goods and services decrease a lot, that is also not good for the economy of that particular country. So inflation makes a balance. It makes an offset the negative effect of deflation. Higher wages. During inflation, the wages of the labor and the salary of the people, they increase because to maintain the cost of living. Clear? What are the negative effects? Increased material cost. We all know during inflation, the price of the goods and services rates increase. That is the problem. And it's very difficult for the common people to afford that price. Adjustable rate mortgage might have higher rates. Whenever you take loan, sometimes you need to mortgage some security. Mortgage some assets as a security against that loan. That interest rate also increase a lot during inflation. Increase borrowing cost. During the inflation, if the inflation rate is high, if you take a loan from the banks or any financial institution, the interest rate gets higher. Bank gives loan on a higher rate of interest. That is a problem for the small business man to run the business or to expand the business. Now, how many types of inflations are there? Creeping or mild inflation. This type of inflation is not bad for the economy. If the inflation falls within 2 to 3%, that means it is a mild inflation. If it falls within the category of 3 to 4%, that means it's a walking inflation. It is also not that bad. But when the inflation rises to 100% or more than that, especially in the poor countries, underdeveloped countries, that is called hyperinflation. Now, the difference between demand pull and cost pull inflation. Demand pull inflation means the demand of the goods and services increase in comparison to supply. Cost push inflation increase the cost of the production process, cost of the raw material, cost of the direct wages, cost of the direct expenses, which overall affects the price of the finished goods. Demand pull inflation always explain the phenomena how does the inflation start? And cost push inflation deals with the idea of the difficulties faced while eliminating the inflation when it once starts. Why it caused? Demand pull inflation is caused due to an increase in the money supply in the market. But cost push inflation is caused due to emergence of the monopolistic groups in the market. The last difference is demand pull inflation's policy is to eliminate and to amend the fiscal policy, but the income policy and the policy of administrative control on price should be reviewed in the cost push inflation. So guys, today we have gone through the chapter of inflation, the definition of inflation, causes of inflation, effects of inflation, negative and positive effects, how many types of inflations are there, what are the difference between demand pull and cost push inflations. These are all the main topic of inflation. Hope you have enjoyed well. Please wait for our next video for the next chapter of economics. Thank you.